Welcome to Futures in Fundraising. I'm David King, president of Alexander Haas, your host for Futures of Fundraising. Today we're joined by Lula Dawit, director of planned giving at the Woodruff Arts Center. Lula, thanks for joining us today.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited.
We often start Futures in Fundraising looking backward, and so we're going to stick with that tradition, as ironic and silly as it seems. I wanted to ask you about this. Like a lot of us, you came into fundraising, you sort of from a different path. You started out as a lawyer practicing law and then moved into fundraising. Tell me about that, practicing law, and what was it that made you decide to leave that and move into the fundraising field?
Sure. So around 2014, I decided, and I had been practicing law since 2010. Okay. And I said, okay, I can either see my path as, striving to be a partner at a law firm, which is really kind of sort of the next sort of level once you move along the ranks, in terms of thinking about what my 5-year plan was going to be. And that just started to further and further, as I gave it some more thought, it didn't fit right with what I, sort of how I viewed my life in the next 5, 10, 15 years. And so I said, okay, well, what can I do? I know that a lot of people have law degrees and don't practice law. So what could that look like for me? And I just started interviewing pretty much everyone I knew that was practicing law, but wasn't, a lawyer per se, in their everyday sort of work experience and work life. So I probably met with, I don't even know, 20, 30 people over the course of the year. I took all my vacation and I really just said, okay, if I'm going to do this, I need to make sure that I come up with, career trajectory that at least still supports some of the things that I liked about practicing law, which is really, relating to our clients, helping them find sort of solutions to different problems that they had, and still using a part of some of my favorite areas of school and subject, which is really, tax law and estate planning. But what does that look like? I'm not sure. So after just meeting with folks, a lot of people were saying, well, what about gift planning? Have you thought about planned giving? We know a lot of former lawyers, and especially lawyers in your area of practice, that have taken this on as their career path, and once I started narrowing in on that area, then I started interviewing all of the gift planners that I could possibly meet and that were nice enough to give me some of their time. And some of them have actually been friends and mentors now to this day. And so, that's kind of how I fell into this world. And a position had opened up at Spelman College. And so that's where I first sort of took on the role of working in fundraising. So what was the hardest part of that move from legal practice, lawyer in a firm, I assume? Right, yeah. Big firm, small firm? This was more of a medium-sized firm.
But in a firm, counting your hours, to what was the hardest part about that and switching into the nonprofit environment?
There are a couple of things. One, sort of the pace of things. Okay. I think that in a law firm, especially when your work is judged by the amount of hours that you're putting in, and you've got timelines, especially if you're involved in sort of the court system and any type of litigation is involved. There are clear, defined timelines for things and getting results and getting answers and moving forward to the next phase of a case. And so fundraising is very different from that. I mean, you've got your fiscal year scheduled, but things happen on the donor's time, not necessarily your time. Right. And that was a hard thing to learn. Another thing is just, resources, right? At a law firm, we just have more resources, financial resources to get the job done. And in working at a nonprofit, you have to be a little bit more savvy about, using internally what you have and then when needed, going to outside sources for help. But really, I think another thing too is just sort of taking off that lawyer hat, as being the one that has like the answers or can find the answers. That something too is just saying, no, coming from even though, you might have these sort of experiences and skills that will supplement and complement being a fundraiser, your first job is a fundraiser. And so, sort of a key about being a good fundraiser is being very donor centric. So kind of having to peel that layer off and just taking off the lawyer hat and putting on the fundraising hat.
So did you find it challenging that as a lawyer, especially you were doing tax and estate law, right? So that's really
and some probate.
It's a chain to your desk kind of job, right? That. Whereas being a plan giving officer is a get out from behind your desk kind of job.
Yeah.
Was that a bit of a shock to the system too?
No, I love that part. Okay. I love meeting people. And so for me, that was something that I was excited to have that sort of switch as being more of a focus point of my job. I mean, yes, even in practice, you have, client interaction, but also, I mean, if you're lower on sort of the totem pole, the folks that are interacting with your clients primarily are the partners. Right. Really, they're the ones that are managing those relationships, at least at the stage that I was and practicing. And so, it was really, really exciting to get to just have that one-on-one frontline experience and build that in. And that's the part that I love the most.
Now, did you get any formal training when you started at Spelman in terms of the development side? Obviously, you had all the technical knowledge that you needed, but how did you sort of get prepared for the fundraising part of that?
Sure. I mean, it's definitely learning on the job, and had some great colleagues that were really helpful and that are still dear friends today, even though I'm no longer working at Spelman, that helped just provide some guidance. And then also it was just pulling on some of those skills that I already had even prior to even going to law school. Like, I've always been a talkative people person. It's just a part of my personality. I always got talks too much on the report card, great student, but talks at inappropriate times. It was just like, and so I think, I've always asked questions. I've always been a curious person. And I think some of those things I found really, I was really excited that, a lot of those other skills that I maybe even had to pull back in a professional setting were able to be assets.
They were now assets.
Yeah.
So we love guests who talk too much on Futures in Fundraising. Let me ask you, so you were at Spelman and now you're at the Woodruff Arts Center as the Director of Plan Giving there. Are there any differences between doing plan giving work at an arts institution like the Woodruff Arts Center versus an educational institution?
No, I mean, I'm learning them along the way as well. But one of the things that, has sort of provided an opportunity to think about, okay, well then who are our donors, right? Who are our loyal patrons? If you're working with a, school or a college, you've got some of that built-in base because you have your alumni, or at least it's Spelman alumni, but you have your alumni. And so those are the folks that have that, connection to your institution historically. So looking at the Arts Center, okay, well then where do those connections lie for us? And Spelman was 1881, I believe, is when it was founded. So, we're, the Woodruff Arts Center is very, very young. We're about to celebrate our 50th anniversary in October for the Alliance Theater and the Art Center itself, even though the High Museum and the Symphony had existed longer than that. But it's just really trying to figure out, okay, well, who are the folks that love us? What does our donor base look like? So that's been, just sort of a shift in kind of thinking about that strategy.
I would imagine at Spelman too, you were primarily working with women.
Yep.
And at the Woodruff Arts Center, you're working with everybody.
Yeah, exactly. So at Spelman, yes, obviously because Spelman's a women's college. And so, a lot of sort of front-to-front conversations and frontline fundraising was with women. And we'd bring in, obviously if there was a spouse involved, a male spouse, we'd bring, them. It's a family conversation at the same time. But at the Art Center, you're dealing with both men and women of all ages as well.
So at the Woodruff Arts Center, are you, as the Director of Plan Giving, then are you a resource to all of the individual components of the Arts Center?
Yes. So, as you know, the Woodruff Arts Center is the 501c3, and the High Museum of Art, the Atlanta Symphony Orchestra, and the Alliance Theater are all, organizational arms under our 501c3. And so I, although I'm technically, a Woodruff Arts Center employee, I work with, the theater and the symphony and the High and the Woodruff Arts Center too, because we have our own board and own donor base as well. And so I serve as a resource that's similar to, a lot of colleges and universities that have a central plan giving office. That's the structure that seems to makes the most sense for, our organizational structure.
Okay. Without having you violate any donor confidence or name any names, I'm wondering if in the time that you've been doing it, if there's a particular instance you can recall where you worked with a donor on creating a plan giving plan that was particularly satisfying to you, like that kind of, moment where you're like, that was great. That's why I got into this.
Yeah. Well, I can, and especially right now. So where we are at the Arts Center, we're revitalizing our Plan Giving program. So right now, in terms of having that frontline relationship building with the donors, we haven't yet got there, at least from my day-to-day activities, because I'm really working on building our program, building our website, building our infrastructure. So I think probably an example I can think of is in terms of a gift that was really fun to work on. I mean, I love all of our planned gifts, whether I've known about one that was coming in and it's a surprise, and it's always a wonderful surprise, or getting to work on it on the front end. But one was, we had this one couple at Spelman who they were really just curious about the college. They're from the South, they're from the Northwest, and were really interested in thinking about incorporating, supporting, some colleges and universities, smaller colleges and universities were interested in looking at women's schools, and just started building a relationship with them. And once they got to know about Spelman and its mission, and they had come down and sort of did a tour of the campus, kind of secretly under disguise. But once they sort of kind of confirmed some things that they were wondering about in terms of the school, they were just so excited to go ahead and incorporate them in their estate plan. But then they also had decided, they realized, okay, well, you know what, there might be a need also for us to think about supporting right now. And so there are folks of the age that, having to take the required minimum distribution, they're over 70 and a half. So, and they realized that that's income that they could use to support their charitable intentions. And so they started using their RMD distribution to give outright to Spelman yearly. So that was really an exciting gift, because then you could pull in the annual giving team as well and say, look, you've got these donors that want to support the college annually. These are some of the things that they may need just to learn more about what we need for our operational expenses. And then you've got this plan gift. And now they've been, at least last I heard, because I still kind of get tabs, that they're thinking about, because the plan gift is made to sort of endow eventually a scholarship that would, but thinking about starting to plant that seed.
Fund the scholarship now. That's one of the things we work with some of our clients on is with donors who they hope will eventually to endow a scholarship to get them started on what we call a living scholarship.
Yep.
So give enough money every year for the next 4 years to fund a scholarship for one or two or however many people, and then have the institution treat that the same way they would treat a donor with an endowed scholarship. So meet the student every year, get to interact, get to have, and we find that it does give donors that, because endowment can be this big thing, right? It's out there and it's an endowment, but what is it really helping?
Right.
But give the donors the opportunity to meet the people who it is helping now and will help in perpetuity.
Absolutely.
And that really can lead people to saying, I do want this to happen forever.
Absolutely.
I do want to make sure this gets endowed.
Absolutely. And another sort of exciting one I could think about too at the Arts Center, one is working with a symphony donor who's also someone that really believes and cares about the musicians, right? And so they have made a planned gift, and in their planned gift, they were very specific as to they want their gift, once realized, to support the musicians' endowment. And so that also is something that, you see these musicians play, you sort of track their career, whether they're, as they sort of progress into eventually first chair, et cetera. And then just, being able to really make that connection was something that's really exciting to work on.
Great. Well, we're going to take a really short break, and we will be right back with more Futures in Fundraising.
When I first started in my career, I was working in Catholic healthcare, and I had wonderful mentors and bosses. They also had 43 sister hospitals that had active foundations, and so they were so good about training me. And initially, it may have been intimidating to go into the field and have to ask for money, but they broke it down into the basic components and taught me and trained me on what I needed to know to be successful.
Welcome back to Futures in Fundraising. Our guest today is Lula Dawit, Director of Planned Giving at the Woodruff Arts Center. I want to switch gears a little bit here,
Sure.
Lula, and ask you this because it's been on everybody's radar these last 8 months or so. The 2017 Tax Act lowered the estate tax and with a continuing decline until eliminated altogether for some period of time. So I know you've been involved in the Planned Giving Council, and I'm sure that this is something you guys have been talking about and having experts come in and talk about. So is there a concern among your peers and you about the impact of the lowering and elimination of the estate tax on people's planned giving activity?
Well, I think at least from, what I'm hearing is that there is a concern, but it feels like more of just an anxiety of the unknown. Okay. But that when we're thinking about the donors that, do support your institution via a deferred plan gift, they're most likely the folks that are going to give anyways. They love your mission. They are connected to your institution. They have been for for many years. It's not someone who's looking to minimize their estate tax. Right. So I think that that's kind of the overall sort of energy that I'm getting, and just what people are saying in terms of the potential consequences. And so I think we'll be fine. I think that it's more so just making sure that we're educating the donors, we're connecting with their advisors as well, and we're continuing being stewarding the folks that are connected to our organizations that are giving.
So my experience with not just planned giving donors, but with all donors has been that the tax implications are secondary or even tertiary to the motivation that they're really giving to make a long-term impact on an institution they care about with money they no longer need. Right. And that the tax thing really is not, if we have it, great. If we don't, so what? That's been your experience too?
Yeah, that really has been at least what I've seen and sort of what my colleagues have been sharing, because there are people that have been in this field far longer than I have. And so, and then even from, putting the lawyer hat on and so in drafting, there have been fluctuations and changes and I don't think that, at least from my perspective, it's impacted. If someone is going to give to an organization, whether their church, their alma mater, an arts institution, boys and girls, something that they do care about, it's going to happen. I
think it's been, if you look at even the very largest estates couldn't give enough away to get into a non-taxable bracket.
Exactly.
Most estates are below taxation level anyway. So you have this relatively small group who could give away some money and get below the threshold and not pay any taxes. But that is not where that's not what most planned gifts come from.
Right, exactly. There are people that are not affected already by sort of, the state tax provision. So they're going to give anyways. Yeah.
Great. That's good to hear. And my personal belief is that the changes, the itemizers, a fewer number of itemizers, the lowering of the estate tax, that none of that is going to have a negative impact, because I don't think people give for tax deductions. I think people give out of emotion and compassion. And the tax deduction is, it's a nice little benefit to giving, but it's not why they give.
Right. And then also when you think about it too, at this time, asset giving, it might make more sense to start thinking about asset giving in terms of the way that our market is fluctuating. So there's also opportunity to say, okay, yes, these provisions have come down and they might affect your giving patterns and your habits, but there's also an avenue of thinking about giving assets as well. So there's some positives.
Yeah. So we talked with our clients a lot about, this is development work. It's about developing relationships, even though this show is called Futures in Fundraising. That fundraising is a part of good development work, but development work is about building relationships, and strong relationships lead to philanthropy. Right. And I would imagine that that those relationships really have to be strong if you're going to start talking to people about death and what's going to happen with their assets when that eventuality comes.
Right.
So is that your experience? Is that does it take longer working with donors to get to the comfort level to talk about that?
Yes, in some respects. So I think that, and it's not necessarily that conversation doesn't have to come from someone that is, quote unquote, a gift planner, such as myself, my role. No, I mean, a major gift officer who's been cultivating a relationship for years can say, okay, this person is ready to now talk about this. So that conversation doesn't necessarily have to come from,
Right.
the person who's doing gift planning. So like, for instance, I'm thinking about my time at Spelman. I had been there, it was at my second year that we started having more focused conversations with some of our alumni groups that were preparing for reunion.
Okay.
And, I was wondering, is it too soon to talk about making a planned gift? And so we then said, okay, well, let me think of a peer within this group that could talk to their classmates, and I'll be there, and we could sort of guide the conversation, but let them lead the conversation because they've got this comfort level. And the women were ready to start talking about it, start planning, take action. But then for some instance, it's too early and it feels transactional. So I think you have to sort of read your audience as well, and kind of get a feel, and that's when you can really rely on the folks that have developed relationships with the folk, either annual giving, their major gift officers that know these donors. So I think that it is definitely relational, and you build it. It's not transactional, and it does take time. But yeah.
Well, and you have to pay attention too, because I know, technically speaking, I fall into the range of age where people would start wanting to talk to me about planned giving, but I still have 2 kids to put through college.
Yeah.
So my planned giving is all going into tuition.
Yeah. And that's exactly. So you have to sort of, look, not everyone is a cookie cutter, and just because they're a certain age or they've technically retired, that they're ready to start having those conversations. And so, yes, you really need to take the donor from where they're coming from and just be very donor centric and sort of in your conversations. And it's definitely not transactional, but some people are ready. Some people want to go ahead and get it started. They've been thinking about it on their own and just haven't approached you to go ahead and make that leap and add you as a beneficiary to their IRA account. So it's just a matter of listening, like you said, and kind of letting the donor take the lead on the conversation.
So it's interesting, we run all these demographics and do all these age overlays, and do they have kids and all of these things, trying to predict planned giving behavior. But I saw a guy speak once who was a researcher, and they had analyzed, he worked for Blackbaud. So they had been analyzing all of the data that Blackbaud has access to and looking at things that they could find that were indicators of willingness to make planned gifts. And the one they found that was the greatest indicator of a willingness to make a planned gift among donors was a donor who proactively contacted the organization to give them an address update. It was more than continuous years of giving, more than increased giving. It was somebody who made a point to give you the change of address so that you didn't lose them, was the leading indicator. And it's the kind of thing you would never think of, right? And it's the kind of thing we don't track in our database.
We don't.
But it's the leading indicator of someone who would be willing to
Wow. Might have to add that to our dynamic
donors.
prospect.
It's interesting.
Prospect list.
One of the things that we counsel our clients on is that everybody who has donor contact should be knowledgeable on planned giving. Especially major gift officers, because as you alluded to before, they already have the relationships. They're in there having the conversations. And for them to then say, oh, you're ready to be a planned giving donor? Here, we're going to hand you off, and you can, now you work with Lula. It doesn't work.
Right.
So, we've talked to them about building some level, at least a baseline level of expertise throughout the organization to at least be able to identify someone who's at that point, and then use their relationship to bring somebody like you in, introduce some concepts that might work for them depending on their situation, but not make a handoff to a planned giving person.
Right.
And is that sort of how you have tried to structure what you're building at the Arts Center?
Yes, definitely. And I think that, it really first begins with developing relationships with your colleagues, right? So just getting to know the development directors and getting to know their managers and their associate and assistant directors, and building that relationship first. So that was just a really crucial part and it's a work in progress. But that on top of also then providing educational training. So creating sort of written materials that they can reference very easily, but then also just having a very open conversation, especially with, the new tax legislation. I think it was just important to get everyone up to speed on what was passed and questions that they may be faced with. So serving as a resource to your colleagues to say, look, these are some questions people might ask. Here's a quick sheet that gives you some answers. So just trying to make, at least for myself, especially kind of having the centralized model as available to my colleagues first, and then making sure that they're comfortable with then asking me to join in on a meeting or take a call, but always keeping them also in the loop as well, since, like you said, they're the ones that have held these relationships.
So thinking back about the sort of the differences between university and college fundraising and the Arts Center, especially when it relates to legacy type gifts. So in the university setting, we have all these wonderful students that we can introduce them to and engage them with and show them how lives are being changed that way. But the motivation on the art side is probably different than that somehow, I'm thinking. How?
Well, I think a couple of things is one is our programming.
Okay.
So there's so much, there's amazing programming across campus. And each, arts partner has sort of a very, try to think of the answer. Well, we'll edit this part, right? Yeah. Okay. But I was saying each arts partner, they have incredible educational programming that reaches young audiences of all ages. So you even have from toddlers to teenagers. The High's got this amazing team program where these teenagers from all across Atlanta get together on a pretty regular basis, and they curate a show, and the public comes in. Cool. So you've got that arm, but then you also have theater for the very young, where the Alliance Theater will often pair with a children's exhibition at the High Museum and create, a play around the exhibition. So right now the High has Winnie the Pooh, and it's a traveling exhibition from the British Museum of Art. And the Alliance created this very beautiful play for young audiences based on that. And so you have the piece where you're showing the impact of the arts on our young audiences, especially also being able to provide another sort of educational arm for the public schools. I mean, any day of the week during the school year, you see a line of buses around the Arts Center, and you know that there are children coming in and learning and sort of complementing, what our public and private schools are doing here throughout our community. So you sort of have that sort of arm where you can really show the educational impact of incorporating and supporting the arts. And then also you think about like the financial impact too of sort of our community, and so what the arts brings into the community. I mean, look at Midtown. It's completely changed. Right. You drive through Midtown and there's new construction and new homes and businesses.
Much younger people living there than when it was single family homes. Nobody could afford one, right?
Exactly. So now, I mean, and you think about the Arts Center as being a really cultural catalyst for sort of the development of our city. And so I think that there are statistics that back all of this up as well. And it's just making sure that we're educating, our donors and prospective donors, as well as the impact that we have on our community.
So one of the challenges that I would imagine that you face in working specifically with High Museum donors is the donors who love art and have collected art and want to give it to the High. And in some cases, it may fit very well with the permanent collection. In some case, it may add something that the permanent collection lacks, or in some cases, it may not fit at all with what the High is trying to do. That must be a challenge too, in working with those donors who are passionate about their art that they've collected, want the High to have it, but probably have some very specific ideas about what they want the High to do with it. Right.
So I think, the High's got amazing experts sort of that can speak to donors, basically, if they're thinking about giving a specific piece of work from a time period, or if it's an antique. I mean, there are experts at the High that have those conversations with those donors. So for instance, I had someone that had reached out that was curious about giving some artwork to the High, and I said, okay, well, and she had named a curator that she had, connected with in the past. And And I said, okay, well, I will connect you both, and you can really have a candid conversation about this work. And then maybe they'll also connect with the chief curator and bring in the development team, or bring in, the artistic director. So it's really, they have the experts that can have those conversations with the donors and really kind of manage the expectations and sort of share, what are some of the behind the scene sort of aspects that need to be taken into consideration that the public really doesn't necessarily know about. Right. That will kind of help, sort of provide a little bit more information to get to the right answer of whether that potential gift of work is something that you would want to be given to the museum. So luckily that we've got such a great team there
and a very diverse collection. I mean,
For
everything
sure.
from fiber to furniture to masterworks to sculpture. I mean, you know,
Southern art.
From classic masterworks to folk art and untrained art. I mean, you've got a little bit of everything. So in some ways, you can welcome just about anything, and unless you just get overloaded, I guess. With something.
Right.
Well, I really appreciate you joining us today. It's been great to talk with you. Thanks.
It's really fun. Thanks
for
having
coming
me.
in. No, I'm glad to do it.
All
I think
right.
you're our first planned giving officer that we've had.
Really?
So it's great to have you in here.
Well, that's an honor, especially since
it's like being the tallest Smurf. I mean, Thank you, everybody, for joining us on Futures in Fundraising. Our guest today has been Lula Dawit, Director of Planned Giving at the Woodruff Arts Center. Tune in next time. We'll have another great guest.